Dr. Mary Ruwart, welcome to the Libertarian Solution. You're here with Nick Coons, Richard Sutton, and Jimmy Anuzo.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to listen to your show, actually. It's quite interesting.
Oh, thank you. It is so much an honor to have you on the show right now. Jim asked me, because I'm such a big fan of yours and your writings and such, and Jim asked me before we were going on, are you nervous, Nick? I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, Nick was a little giddy, so.
So thank you so much for joining us. And we were talking about charity and government involvement in charity. I don't want to specifically say government charity because that sounds like an oxymoron, but government involvement in charity. And now I know in your book, Healing Our World, you've talked quite a bit about government involvement in charity, what puts people in poverty to begin with, and why government involvement has actually made the problem worse. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, you know, today, most poverty in our country is really created by government. And I know that's kind of hard for people to believe, but, you know, when you think about it, when regulators make it very difficult for people to get a job because they need a license or the small business needs to institute certain regulatory compliance issues, people are thrown out of work, and that's really what causes poverty. The average regulator destroys about 150 private sector jobs every year. So that's pretty bad. So one of the reasons we have so much poverty in this country is we're destroying jobs. And then when we try to help them, we do it in a way that isn't a very good way. You know, I used to rent to welfare recipients, and I watched what happened. You know, they would work the system, not because they're bad people, but because it was offered to them. And when they tried to get out, when they would start, they would, have a child, for example, in high school. And, of course, a high school girl doesn't realize what life's about. And she would have a child, and that welfare check looked very enticing. So these women would come to me and say, I'm going to have a baby in a few months, and then I'll get this welfare check, and I can have an apartment. Would you rent an apartment to me? And then when they actually had the child, of course, they found out that there was much more to it than they thought. And so they had a second child to get a bigger stipend, and then a third child to get a bigger stipend, and then, of course, that was it. There was no more increases in Michigan, where I was living. And then they said, wow, I'm going to be in poverty all my life because a welfare check isn't enough to buy anything, really. And so they'd go out and try to get a job. But since they had the first child very early, they usually could only get a minimum wage or a starter job, which would have been fine if they had been in high school, but wasn't so good when you had daycare for 3 children. So they quickly decided that wasn't a good deal, and they'd go back on welfare. If they could just stick it out for a couple years because a relative would help them, like babysitting the children or something, well, they'd get raises and everything, they'd get in the system, and they'd end up fine. But most of them were just too discouraged to try. So our system actually creates even more poverty.
Mary, where is there more opportunity? In a society that is controlled by like a centrally planned government, or in a society where cooperation or voluntary type contracts take place?
Well, the more freedom you have, the better off you are. You can actually see that the more government spends, the less we have, and the poorer we get. And this is true throughout the world. In fact, there was a study done of all the countries in the world. They measured how much of the productivity of the country that the government spent, and the more it spent, the poorer the people were. And that's because government isn't very efficient. We're actually pretty clever in how we spend our money relative to government, and you can see this just by looking at all the boondoggles and the bailouts and things of this nature that government does. So the thing to do is to have fewer regulations, fewer taxes, and relatively free trade, so that you can get all the inexpensive items from other countries. And when that happens, when countries have done that, they've gone from really impoverished nations into more prosperous ones. The Irish did this a little while back. Britain did it. New Zealand did it when they were getting bankrupt. And all of them have recovered, and it's wonderful to see.
Now, one of the arguments that people for big government charity tend to make is that, as it is right now, it might not be that great, but at least there's something guaranteed there that people are going to have. If we went to a free market-based solution where where government was completely hands-off and people gave charitably on a voluntary basis, the argument is that, well, there might be people who slip through the cracks there, so it's not very good now, but at least there's something for everyone. What would be the response to something like that?
Well, actually, in any system, there will be people slipping through the cracks. That's just life, unfortunately.
Right.
The question is, where are there more people? And there's actually more people today. For example, to get a welfare check, you have to have an address. So if you're homeless, you're automatically eliminated from the system, and you have to rely solely on private charity in most states. So, the people who really need the assistance most can't get it, which is very scary. I had a woman in my apartment complex who had a very sick child. He had a chronic disease. She found out that there would be a hospital in Tennessee that would give him free treatment, and she wanted to go. But she couldn't get, she went to the welfare office and she found out that she could not get a couple weeks of rent that she wasn't, because she'd have to be away from her job. She couldn't get that couple weeks of rent from the welfare agency. The only thing she could do would be to, go on welfare completely. And so that's what she had to end up doing. And, of course, the taxpayers had to pay for that. And the thing is about government charity, it's not only wasteful in that respect, but about 75% of the tax dollars we put aside to help the poor actually go to the social workers.
Yeah.
In a private system, it's volunteers usually distributing the money and collecting the money. And so there's very little overhead, probably about 20%. So it's just the flip side of it. And so really what welfare is, or government charity, as we've been talking about it, it's really charity for the middle class social workers is what it is.
Well, it's taking people's tax dollars and distilling it through a vast bureaucracy of grabbing hands.
Yes, it is. And every time we pay taxes, we get about, on average, half of the service that we pay for. So it's a bad deal to start with, and the reason is just what you said, because at every step of the way, we have to pay a regulator, we have to pay the tax man, or we have to pay the congressperson to decide, how the money is going to be distributed. There's always someone else to pay. Whereas when we give to someone as an individual or even to a charitable organization, we basically write that check and give it to them, and that's it. There's no middleman.
Well, and I actually know something about nonprofit charitable organizations enough to say that if your charitable organization has more than 15% overhead, fire them.
I would agree with that. Now, what about Mary, what about those people that say, and this is what I've heard, that the rich are not charitable enough? They take their money, they kind of squirrel it away. They don't give it to people who are truly in need, and it's the middle class that does all the charity, but rich people aren't that charitable.
Well, I haven't heard that, but it may or may not be true. I did see a study one time where someone tried to figure out how much better off people would be if we took all the rich people and basically took all their money away and distributed it to the poor. And the difference wasn't very big because there are few rich people and many poor people. Now, the libertarian solution really for poverty is to do away with it. And the way we can do away with it is not taking one person's money and giving it to another, but increasing the prosperity of a nation. And this is an interesting thing that even the World Bank, which is not a libertarian organization, has figured this out. For many years they said, well, if we have economic growth, the poor will suffer. And then they actually did the studies and found out that the poor benefited the most, because if you doubled the country's prosperity, the rich people got twice as rich, and so they could afford a fancier car, but the poor people got twice as rich too, and that made the difference between watching their children starve and giving them not only enough to eat, but enough to take them to a place where they could get educated. So what you can see very clearly is when you have prosperity, the poor are the real beneficiaries because they haven't even begun to meet their basic needs, let alone get luxuries. So, and the way to make a country prosperous, again, is to have economic freedom. And there's some really great studies out on that, and of course I talk about them in Healing Our World for those who are interested in that. But all we have to do really is to lower government spending, lower taxes, and reduce regulations, have a free market and trade, and the country will go from being bankrupt, literally, as New Zealand was in the 80s, to a prosperous country.
Don't we, the thing that always bothers me with class warfare arguments is that don't we want to encourage as many rich people as we possibly can have? I mean, isn't it a good thing to have more rich people rather than less rich people? Or someone who argues...
Everyone should be rich.
Yeah, no, but I mean, if you look at the former Soviet Union, you look at Russia, they have a lot of people who are impoverished, and I think they miss the point that if you don't put the restrictions in place and you allow people to go out there and make their way, you'll get more of what you want, which is people that are doing well. I mean, you're just going to, like you mentioned, there's no utopia. You're still going to have poor people, but at least the poor people have a chance. Someone who's not doing well has a chance to do well.
Well, they can change their station in life through education, hard work, or whatever they, a good idea even. But
That's right.
but they can also do better even at that station because the wealth of the entire nation has risen.
That's right, and you can just look at different countries. Like John Stossel had a great special on this one year. What he did is he tried to open a business in Hong Kong, New York City, and India. And in Hong Kong, which of course at that point in time had the highest per capita income in the world, this was before China took it over, it took him, less than a day to get a business license and set himself up. In New York City, it took him several weeks. And in India, where of course there's a lot of poverty, it was going to take 5 years, and he might not ever get the business license. So you can see the difference. You can see the impact that government regulation has on a person's ability to start their own business and earn money for themselves. I mean, if you have to wait 5 years to feed your family, it's just not going to work.
So Jim made a good point about the class warfare, and it reminds me of the yacht tax, I think, from a decade ago or something like that, where the idea was that, these rich people aren't paying enough, so we're going to tax their yachts. So every time they buy a yacht, they're going to pay a higher tax, and which I'm sure you're aware. What ended up happening is the rich people just decided to keep their money and said, okay, well, we're not going to buy as many yachts then, and that didn't hurt them at all. They didn't really lose any more money. What happened is all the middle class people who actually make the yachts are the ones that lost all their jobs. So we ended up harming people because we were trying to attack a certain class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. There is this fallacy out there that that people are poor because others are rich, and that's simply not true. That's not what the studies show, and it's not what happens in reality. And it's very sad that we think that way because we look at other people and we envy what they have, and we try to take it by force, and we actually end up hurting ourselves. And I think that's really the libertarian ideal. The real libertarian concept is that when we use aggression to get our way, we do it because we think we're going to be richer, we're going to be happier, but in fact it backfires on us every time. That just doesn't work.
Okay. Well, we have to take a quick break, and we'd love if we could have you hold on through the break for us because we have many more questions for you.
Sure.
All right, we're going to head out to a quick break here on the Libertarian Solution. Don't forget to call in with your questions for Dr. Mary Ruwart at 480-949-1310. Welcome back to the Libertarian Solution. Don't forget to call in with any questions at 480-949-1310. We're here with Dr. Mary Ruwart. Mary, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're happy to have you. We wanted to talk a little bit about your book, Healing Our World. Now, I've read the 93 edition. I haven't read the more recent 2003 edition. But I have to say that in Chapter 1, my very favorite line, probably out of any book ever, is the one that prefaces the chapter. It's, "We are well aware that if we commit certain actions against our neighbors, fighting and impoverishment will result. Somehow we think these same actions create peace and plenty if applied to our community, state, nation, and world." Mm-hmm. I think that's a great view of the way people interact with each other. They tend to be very libertarian on the individual level, but as soon as they get into groups, the mentality changes. Why? Do you have any reasons for why you think that might be?
Well, I think it's a matter of the way we use the words. And, for example, let's take the concept of taxation. If you were my next-door neighbor and I came to you and I asked you for a donation for my favorite charity, if you said no, I'd probably say, well, thank you, I'll try another day. But, if we don't do that when we interact group to group, if we feel, as we've been talking about, that, say, the rich aren't paying enough taxes, what we do is we go to the polls and we vote to take their money, literally at gunpoint, if necessary, and, for our particular charity. And if a majority of people say it's okay, then we feel it's perfectly acceptable to take from the minority, kind of minority persecution. And, we just never react like that. I'd never come to your house on a one-to-one basis, and if you said, no, I don't want to contribute to your favorite charity, I'd never pull a gun, point it at you, and take your money at gunpoint. I mean, we think that whole concept's ridiculous.
Well, that would be theft, right? I mean,
it would be.
If you showed up at my house with a gun and you said, Jim, I need $20 to help Richard out over there because he's kind of hungry, and you pulled the gun on me and I, gave you the $20, I'd be right to be pretty upset, wouldn't I?
Well, right. Not only would you be upset when you had a favorite charity, you'd feel like doing the same thing to me. You'd come over if you hadn't already gotten the police on me. You'd come over, and if I didn't give you $20 for your favorite charity, you'd pull a gun on me.
Well,
And
yeah.
we'd have bad feelings, right? We'd be feuding. It'd be a very unhappy situation, and we'd both spend a lot of time trying to defend ourselves against the other.
But wouldn't it be okay if I didn't have the gun and I robbed, if I was robbing Jim, if I had a friend who had the gun, would that be okay?
Well, you have to ask yourself if instead of me coming to your house with a gun to rob you, I go and gather up the majority of my neighbors and come to you and say, okay, hand over your money. Do you feel any less stolen from?
No, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, well,
A lot of people think that they're not stealing if they ask government to do it.
That's right, because instead of getting the majority of our neighbors, what we do is we hire a thug, basically. We hire somebody, we call them the government, to go and take your money. And, of course, most people give it up willingly because they know that if they don't give it up, if they don't pay the IRS, that the government's going to come out with guns and, take their home or take their money or whatever it is. And so there's a feeling of distance here. In other words, you don't see your neighbors, the majority of the neighbors, gathering up and taking your money. What you see is the government agent. Now, it's very easy then to blame the government for taking your money rather than the majority of your neighbors. But because they're taking your money, when you have a pet project, you're going to go to the polls and you're going to vote to take their money. And we take turns being victims and aggressors, majorities and minorities. We go back and forth, and we waste a lot of money. It costs us about 50% to have this little battle just right off the top. So, and of course, we don't have good feelings about each other. The poor don't like the rich, and the welfare recipients are looked on askance by those who have to pay the taxes for them, and there's all kinds of interplay going on that's very negative. That's what happens when we don't honor our neighbor's choice. And that's really, again, what libertarianism is all about. This is what we were taught as children. If we are playing with our playmate, we don't hit them, we don't steal from them, we don't lie to them. And if we do one of these things, if we grab one of their toys and break it, for example, we have to restore it. That's what we used to have to do. If you put a baseball through your neighbor's window, you have to pay for it out of your allowance. We all remember these lessons, and they teach us how to really relate well with people one-to-one. But somehow we think if we do it differently as a group, it's going to give us peaceful results, and it just doesn't work that way.
Is there comfort in numbers? Because I always ask the question to someone who argues that taxation is justified, and I always say, eventually you're basically asking for someone to come to my house. Let's say I'm the one who refuses to pay. Come to my house with a gun and tell me I'm going to pay or else. And I said, are you comfortable? I always ask the question, are you comfortable with knowing that you're basically sending someone, an agent of yours, to my house with a gun to force me to pay? And they never can answer that question because I personalize it to me. But if you phrase it in kind of a group speak, well, there's some people that don't pay their taxes. Oh, we should get the money from them. It always amazes me that they won't go to that step and say, yes, I'm comfortable with having the person come to your house with a gun, hold it to your head, and make you empty your pocket. They won't go to that step.
No, because I think most people recognize that this is a form of aggression that is counterproductive. And, there's just a gut feeling that that's wrong. We know it. And I think that's why government has been successful, is because they disguise that. It's very disguised. We don't recognize it because it's the government agent.
Yeah.
And we don't see ourselves doing it.
Right. Yeah, they withhold funds from our paycheck, and so it's not something direct where someone's coming up to us all the time and saying, hand me a wad of cash every week out of your paycheck. It just kind of disappears and we don't notice it,
That's
supposedly.
Right. Right, and we call it a different name. You see, if we said, instead of calling it taxes, we called it thievery, or if we called it, what does the mafia call it when they come and they...
Protection money?
Yeah, protection
money. That's it. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for and wasn't remembering. Yes, so if we called it protection money or something like that, I think we'd think very differently about it. But that's the power of language, is in changing our perception of what's actually happening. The act is identical,
Well,
but where our perception is different because of the word.
Okay, we'd like to go to the phones. We've got a caller, Corky in Tempe, who has a question for you. Corky, welcome to the Libertarian Solution. Are you there, Corky? No, doesn't. Somehow I lost you. Mary, are you still there?
I'm here.
All right, thank you. We lost the caller somehow. So anyway, if someone was interested in reading your book, Healing Our World, which I can go through the chapters and look, you've got information about jobs, small businesses, health,
Environment.
environments there, banking, education. It's all there. Where would someone go to get a copy of Healing Our World?
Well, there's several places. Obviously, they can get it at Amazon. If they want to read the 92 version for free first, they can go to my website at ruwart.com, RUWART.com. That's RUWART.com. And they can download the 92 version free. And then they can decide if they want the greatly updated 2003 version.
Okay, sounds good then. Looks like we've got our caller back. Let's try this one more time. Corky, are you there?
Yes, I didn't get cut off. Yeah, I'm willing to give you guys the benefit of the doubt here. Why don't we form a coalition government between you libertarians and us Greens, and we'll see, and we'll lower the taxes because we'll stop the wars and aggressions and everything, and we'll see if the people take this extra money in their pockets and give it to charities. And if not, then we'll have to try the gun solution.
Well,
you know, no, I think is great. You know, that's one of the things. I'm a scientist by profession, Corky, so I really appreciate your willingness to experiment here. And one of the things that we do agree on, of course, is the war. And we both predict that if the war ends, we're going to have more prosperity in the country. And I think I think it's pretty obvious that when a person's more prosperous, they can help their neighbors more, and I think they would. Of course, again, if we really want to do a good job here and not have to repeat experiments that people have already done, we can look at the literature and we can see what happens. And that's why I wrote Healing Our World, because I got together really hundreds of examples of how liberty actually works in the real world, because that's the only world that counts, not in our minds, your mind or my mind. We want it to work in the real world. And so I put those together and, put the story together so, it would be easy to comprehend. And so I invite you to, check that out too. And if you have questions, there's my email's right there on the website for you to inquire. And that way, when we get together and have a coalition, we'll have a coalition where we've utilized all this information and we don't have to wait and see on some of this. And then the stuff we do have to wait and see on, we can take it to a better place, and then we can talk about what we need to do next. I think that's a great idea.
Well, Corky, thank you so much for the call. And Dr. Mary Ruwart, we wanted to thank you for being a guest on our show today. We do have to head out to a quick break. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you on soon in the future.
Yes, please give me a call, and it's been a delight being with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
All right, we're going to head out to a quick break here on the Libertarian Solution. Don't forget to call in at 480-949-1310 if you have any questions, and you can visit our website at libertariansolution.com.